She's not really family, my daughter-in-law said with a light laugh, balancing a paper plate in her hand. She's more like an obligation we manage. The words landed in the middle of Daniel's backyard like a dropped glass, sharp enough that even the kids near the kiddie pool went quiet for a second before the noise picked back up. I was standing 3 steps away from the folding table, holding the bowl of potato salad I had made from scratch that morning, still chilled from the cooler in my trunk. The Texas heat pressed against my shoulders, and for a moment, I thought I had misheard her. I set the bowl down carefully beside a tray of store-bought cookies, smoothing the edge of the plastic wrap, as if that small motion could steady my hands. "Melissa," I said, keeping my voice even. "That's an interesting way to describe me." She turned toward me without a hint of embarrassment, her smile polished, the kind she used at church fundraisers and neighborhood meetings. "Oh, Eleanor, I didn't mean it in a bad way," she replied, tilting her head slightly. "We just all have responsibilities, right?" A few people nearby chuckled softly, the kind of polite laughter that tries to dissolve tension without addressing it. My son Daniel stood by the grill, flipping burgers, his eyes fixed on the smoke rising from the charcoal, as if it required his full attention. "Daniel," I called, not raising my voice, just enough to reach him. He glanced over, gave a quick half-smile, and said, "Let's just enjoy the day, Mom." Then he turned back to the grill. I picked up a stack of paper plates, handing them to my granddaughter Lily, who avoided my eyes for a second before whispering, "Thanks, Grandma." The backyard looked exactly as it always did during these Sunday gatherings. String lights draped along the fence, a cooler filled with soda cans and bottled water, a folding table lined with casseroles and aluminum trays. It should have felt familiar, comforting even. Instead, it felt arranged like a stage I had somehow been written out of. I moved toward the edge of the patio, brushing past a couple of Daniel's neighbors discussing their upcoming trip to Colorado. One of them paused mid-sentence when I approached, then shifted the conversation to the weather. I leaned against the wooden railing, watching the condensation drip down. My glass of iced tea. The sweetness tasted faint, like something watered down. Behind me, I heard Melissa again, her voice lower now, but still clear enough. "We've been handling things for a while," she said to someone. "It's just easier this way. Handling things." The phrase settled into me with more weight than the joke she had made earlier. I turned slightly, catching a glimpse of her gesturing toward the house, toward the kitchen where I used to move freely without asking. I thought about the last Thanksgiving, when my seat had been moved to the end of the table for space, and the Christmas before that, when I was told dinner would be small this year, only to see photos later of a full table posted online. At the time, I had told myself families change, traditions shift. Standing there now, with the late afternoon sun stretching shadows across the lawn, those moments began to line up in a way I could no longer ignore. Lily came up beside me, holding a melting popsicle, her voice quiet. "Grandma," she said, glancing back toward her mother, "Mom says stuff like that when you're not here." I looked at her, really looked this time, noticing the hesitation in her expression, the way she pressed her lips together as if she had already said too much. "What kind of stuff, honey?" I asked. She shook her head quickly. "I don't know, just things." Before I could ask more, Melissa called her name from across the yard, her tone warm but firm. Lily hurried back, leaving me with the sound of laughter rising again, blending with the sizzle of the grill and the distant hum of traffic from the main road. I stood there a moment longer, my hand resting on the railing, and realized something that felt both simple and unsettling. This hadn't started today. This had been building quietly, piece by piece, in conversations I wasn't part of, in decisions made without me, in words chosen carefully when I was present and differently when I wasn't. And if Melissa felt comfortable enough to say it out loud in front of everyone, then the real question wasn't why she said it. The real question was how long everyone else had already believed it. I stayed by the railing longer than I needed to, letting the noise of the backyard settle back into something that sounded almost normal, though nothing about it felt that way anymore. After a minute, I pushed myself upright and walked back toward the house, carrying my empty glass like I had somewhere specific to be. Inside, the kitchen was cooler, the hum of the refrigerator steady, the scent of baked beans and barbecue sauce lingering in the air. I moved toward the sink, setting my glass down beside a stack of used plates, and reached for a dish towel. It gave me something to do with my hands. Through the open window above the sink, I could still hear laughter drifting in from the yard. Melissa's voice carried again, lighter now, almost playful. "No, we have got it handled," she said. "It is all organized." I paused, the dish towel still in my hand. Organized. That word again, close enough to what she had said earlier that it felt intentional. I turned off the faucet I had not realized I had turned on, drying my hands slowly as I listened. The back door creaked open, and Melissa stepped inside, her heels clicking softly against the tile. She had not noticed me at first. She went straight to the counter, picked up her phone, and glanced at the screen with a quick, focused expression that did not match the easy smile she wore outside. "Yes, it is set up," she said into the phone, her voice lower now. "Automatic, just like we discussed. It keeps things simple on our end." I stayed where I was, half hidden by the angle of the cabinet, not moving, not interrupting. There was a pause as she listened. "No, she does not need the details," Melissa added, her tone calm, almost reassuring. "It would just confuse her." The words settled into the room, heavier than anything she had said outside. I stepped forward then, making just enough noise with the dish towel that she turned quickly. Her expression shifted in an instant, the sharper edge gone, replaced by that same composed smile. "Oh, Eleanor," she said, slipping her phone into her pocket. "I did not realize you were in here. I needed a moment out of the sun," I replied, meeting her gaze. "Texas summers do not get any easier." She laughed lightly, as if we were sharing something harmless. "Tell me about it. You would think we would get used to it. After all these years." There was a beat of silence, thin and stretched. I nodded toward the counter. "Busy day?" I asked. She followed my glance, then shrugged. "Just coordinating a few things. You know how it is. Managing a household takes structure." "Structure," I repeated, folding the dish towel neatly. "That is one word for it." For a second, something flickered in her eyes, a calculation, quickly masked. "Daniel appreciates it," she said. "It keeps everything running smoothly." I held her gaze a moment longer, then gave a small nod, as if that explanation was enough. "Of course," I said. "Smooth is always good." She smiled again, satisfied, and reached for a tray of corn on the cob. "Can you carry this out for me?" she asked, already turning toward the door. I picked up the tray, the warmth from the buttered corn seeping through the paper towel beneath it, and followed her back outside. The backyard looked the same as before, but I felt as if I were seeing it from a different distance now. Daniel was still at the grill, laughing at something one of his friends had said. Lily sat on the edge of the patio, scrolling through her phone. I set the tray down on the table, aligning it carefully beside the other dishes. "Everything smells great," Daniel said as I approached, finally meeting my eyes. "You always bring the best sides, Mom." "I've had a lot of practice," I replied. He smiled, but it did not quite reach his eyes. As I stepped back, I noticed a clipboard lying near the cooler, partly tucked under a stack of napkins. It was not something I had seen earlier. A printed sheet was clipped to it, with neat columns and typed headings. "Household budget overview," it read at the top. Beneath it were line items, utilities, groceries, maintenance, and one line that caught my attention immediately. "Family support contribution, $800 monthly." My hand hovered for a fraction of a second before I reached down and lifted the top page just enough to see more. There were dates listed, month after month, each marked as received. I felt a quiet shift inside me. Not sharp, not sudden, but steady and undeniable. This was no longer a matter of tone or careless words. This was something structured, recorded, and repeated. "Mom!" Daniel's voice came from behind. "Me." I set the paper back exactly where I had found it and turned toward him. "Yes," I said. He glanced at the clipboard, then back at me. "Everything okay?" For a moment, I considered answering him directly, asking the question that had already formed in my mind. Instead, I smiled, the same kind of calm smile I had used all afternoon. "Everything is very organized," I said. He hesitated, as if he wanted to say more, but Melissa called his name from across the yard, and he turned away. I watched him go, then looked back at the clipboard, at the neat rows of numbers that seemed to tell a story no one had bothered to explain to me. And as the noise of the gathering continued around me, one thought settled in with quiet clarity. If they had been tracking every dollar I gave them, then I needed to find out exactly where those dollars had been going. I did not bring it up again that afternoon, not at the table, not in front of Daniel, and certainly not with Melissa watching every movement in that quiet, deliberate way of hers. Instead, I moved through the rest of the gathering as if nothing had shifted, refilling lemonade pitchers, clearing paper plates, answering small talk about the weather and Lily's college plans. It gave me time to observe. Melissa stayed close to the center of everything, greeting guests, directing where dishes should go, reminding Daniel to check the burgers. She looked like the woman in charge of a well-run home, and everyone seemed to accept that without question. When the sun began to dip and people started gathering their things, I made my way inside again, this time with purpose. The kitchen was nearly empty, just the hum of the dishwasher starting its cycle and the faint clink of plates being stacked. I walked over to my purse, which I had set on the counter earlier, and pulled out my phone. My fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before I opened my banking app. The numbers loaded slowly, the familiar balance appearing first, then the transaction history. I scrolled down, past grocery charges and utility payments, until I reached the recurring transfers. $800. Same date each month. Labeled simply as family support. I had set that up 2 years ago after Daniel mentioned things were tight with the mortgage and Lily's school expenses. At the time, it had felt like the natural thing to do. Family helps family. I tapped one of the entries, expanding the details. The destination account was partially masked, but the last 4 digits did not match anything I recognized. That was new. I was certain I had originally set it up to go directly to Daniel's account. You still using that same transfer, Mom? Daniel's voice came from the doorway, casual, almost offhand. I looked up, locking my phone without rushing. I was just checking a few things, I said. He stepped into the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. You know you do not have to keep doing that, he added, though his tone did not quite match the words. We're doing fine. I studied him for a second, noticing the way he avoided looking directly at the phone in my hand. That is interesting, I replied, because I just saw a budget sheet outside with my name on it. He let out a short breath, half a laugh. Melissa likes to keep everything organized. It does not mean anything. It usually means something, I said quietly. He shifted his weight, glancing toward the hallway, as if expecting Melissa to walk in at any moment. Mom, it is just how she tracks expenses. It keeps things clear. Clear for who? I asked. The question hung there, simple and direct. He did not answer right away. Instead, he reached for a glass, filled it with water, and took a long sip. You are overthinking it, he said finally. We appreciate what you do. You know that. I held his gaze, searching for the boy who used to explain everything to me without hesitation, the man who used to call just to talk. What I saw instead was someone choosing his words carefully, someone measuring what to say and what to leave out. I'm sure you do, I said, my voice even. That is why I want to understand exactly how it is being used. Before he could respond, Melissa's voice floated in from the living room. Daniel, can you help me with the chairs? He glanced toward the sound, relief flickering across his face. I'll be right there, he called back, then turned to me. We can talk about it later, okay? Of course, I said, stepping aside to let him pass. He gave me a quick, almost distracted smile and walked out. I waited until his footsteps faded before unlocking my phone again. This time, I tapped into the transfer details more carefully, scrolling through the history, comparing dates, amounts, and account numbers. The pattern was consistent, too consistent to be accidental, and the account receiving the money had not always been the same. That was what stopped me. The earlier transfers from about a year ago ended in a different set of digits than the recent ones, which meant something had been changed deliberately at some point. I closed the app slowly, slipping the phone back into my purse. Through the doorway, I could see Melissa directing where the folding chair should be stacked, her voice calm, efficient, confident. Everyone listened to her. Everyone followed her lead. I picked up my purse, smoothing the strap over my shoulder, and took one last look at the kitchen that used to feel like part of my own home. Whatever system she had built here, it was more than just organization. It was control, structured and documented. And if that account number had changed once without me knowing, then the next question was not just where my money was going now, but who had decided it should ever go anywhere else in the first place. By the time I left that evening, the sky had turned a soft orange over the rooftops, and the air had cooled just enough to make the drive home feel quieter than usual. I did not turn on the radio. I let the silence sit with me, the kind that allows thoughts to line up instead of scatter. When I pulled into my condo complex in Sarasota, the parking lot lights had already come on, casting long shadows across the pavement. I carried my purse and the empty casserole dish inside, set everything down on the kitchen counter, and went straight to my desk by the window. I did not change clothes. I did not make tea. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed to life, and within a minute I was back inside my bank account, this time on a larger screen where I could see everything clearly. I pulled up 12 months of statements, then 18, then 24. I wanted the full picture. The pattern held, month after month. $800 leaving my account like clockwork. At first, the receiving account matched what I remembered setting up with Daniel 2 years ago. Then, about 11 months in, it changed. Same amount, same date, different account number. I leaned closer, adjusting my reading glasses, making sure I was not missing something simple. I was not. I reached for the small notepad I kept beside the keyboard and wrote down the last 4 digits of each account, lining them up in 2 columns. Old, new. The difference was not subtle anymore. It was deliberate. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I had not needed to call in a while, Harold Green. He had been my husband's attorney for years, the one who helped us set up our estate and handled everything after Thomas passed. I pressed call before I could second-guess it. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice steady and familiar. Eleanor, it is good to hear from you. How are you holding up? I've had better weeks, Harold, I said, allowing a small breath into my voice but keeping it controlled. I need to ask you something about a transfer I set up a while back. Of course, he replied. What seems to be the issue? I explained it simply, sticking to facts. The monthly amount, the original arrangement with Daniel, the change in account numbers. I could hear him typing lightly on his end, the faint click of keys. And you did not authorize any modification to that transfer? He asked. No, I said. I have not changed anything since the day I set it up. There was a pause, longer this time. Eleanor, he said carefully, automatic transfers like that do not usually change destination accounts on their own. Someone would have needed access to either your banking credentials or the authorization forms to redirect it. I felt something settle into place, not panic, not even anger yet, just a firm recognition of what that meant. So it was not a system update, I said. No, he replied. That would be highly unlikely. I looked back at the numbers on my notepad, at the clean break between the old account and the new one. If someone had access once, I asked, could they change it again without notifying me? If they still have access, yes. He said, that is why I would recommend you contact your bank first thing in the morning, lock down the account, and review any authorized users or link credentials. I nodded, even though he could not see me. Thank you, Harold. That is exactly what I needed to know. Eleanor, he added, his tone gentler now. If this involves family, you may want to proceed carefully. These situations can become complicated. I allowed myself a faint smile, though there was no humor in it. Understand, I said, but I would rather deal with something complicated than ignore something dishonest. After we ended the call, I sat there for a moment, my hand resting on the notepad. Then I opened another tab and began pulling up my old emails, searching for the original confirmation from when I had set up the transfer. It took a few minutes, but I found it. The document was still there, a PDF attachment with the bank's header and the original account details. I compared it side by side with the current information on my screen. There was no question now. The destination account had been changed after the fact, and it had not been done by me. I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the darkened window where my reflection stared back, older perhaps, but clearer than it had been that afternoon. This was no longer about a careless comment at a family gathering or a vague sense of being pushed to the side. This was a paper trail, This was access, authorization, and intent. And there were only two people who had ever sat with me at that kitchen table while I set up that transfer. Two people who had seen my login, who knew exactly how it worked. I closed the laptop slowly, my mind already moving ahead. Not to confrontation, not yet, but to verification. Because before I said a single word to either of them, I needed one more piece of information, one that would tell me exactly who had touched that account and when it had been done. The next morning, I was already dressed by 7, standing in my kitchen with a cup of black coffee that had gone untouched for 10 minutes. The Florida sun had barely cleared the rooftops, but my mind was already several steps ahead of where it had been the night before. I picked up my phone and dialed the bank the moment their customer service line opened. After a brief hold, a woman with a calm, professional voice answered. "Thank you for calling Wells Fargo. This is Karen speaking. How can I assist you today?" "Good morning, Karen," I said, steady and precise. "I need to review the authorization history on a recurring transfer from my account. Specifically, I need to know when the destination account was changed and how that change was made." There was a pause as she pulled up my file, the soft clicking of keys in the background. "I can certainly look into that for you, Ms. Whitmore. Give me just a moment." I walked over to the window, watching a man across the parking lot load groceries into his trunk, something ordinary to anchor the moment. "All right," Karen continued. "I do see the transfer you are referring to. It was originally set up 2 years ago, as you stated. The destination account was modified approximately 11 months ago. And how was that modification authorized?" I asked. Another pause, slightly longer this time. "It appears the change was made through online banking credentials associated with your account," she said. "The login was verified, and the update was processed from there." I felt a quiet tightening in my chest, not panic, not even surprise anymore, just confirmation. "Was there any notification sent to me when that change was made?" I asked. "Yes, there should have been an email confirmation sent to the address on file," she replied. I turned back toward my laptop on the desk. "Thank you. That is helpful." We went through a few more steps, placing additional security on the account, updating passwords, removing any linked devices that I did not immediately recognize. By the time I ended the call, I had regained something I had not fully realized I had lost the day before: control over my own information. I sat down and opened my email again, this time searching more carefully, using specific dates. It took longer than I expected, but eventually I found it, buried between promotional messages and routine account notices. Subject line: Transfer Update Confirmation. The timestamp matched exactly with the date Karen had given me. I opened the email slowly. The details were clear. The transfer had been redirected to a different account, confirmed through my login. Processed without issue. I stared at the line that read, "If you did not authorize this change, please contact us immediately." I had never seen this email before. Or if I had, it had been buried, unnoticed, lost among dozens of others. I leaned back, letting that realization settle. Whoever made that change had not just accessed my account. They had relied on the fact that I would not catch it, that I would trust the system, trust the people around me, and continue as I always had. My phone buzzed on the desk, pulling me out of the thought. Daniel's name lit up the screen. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. "Good morning, Mom," he said, his tone easy, almost casual. "Hey, I was thinking about yesterday. Melissa and I talked, and we figured it might be best if we handle the finances a little differently going forward." I said nothing at first, giving him space to continue. "What do you mean?" I asked finally. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "you have been helping a lot, and we appreciate that. But it might be simpler if we just consolidate everything on our end. Less confusion, you know? Less confusion." The phrase echoed Melissa's word from the day before. Organized. Simple. Managed. "Are you asking me to change something?" I asked. "Not exactly asking," he replied, a slight hesitation slipping into his voice. "More like suggesting. We could set up a new arrangement, maybe increase the contribution a bit, so it covers everything in one place." There it was. The stakes had shifted. This was no longer just about money already moved. They were preparing to formalize it, to expand it, to lock it in more tightly. I walked over to the counter, resting my hand on the cool surface. "Daniel, I said, my voice calm, but firmer now. Before we change anything, I think it would be wise for me to review exactly how things are currently set up. There was a brief silence on the line. Mom, there is really nothing to review, he said. It is all straightforward. I'm sure it is, I replied. That is why it should be easy to go over together. Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted just slightly. Okay, he said, if that is what you want, we can sit down this weekend and walk through everything. Good, I said. I will bring my records. We ended the call politely, almost normally, but the air between us had changed. I set my phone down and looked back at the open email on my laptop, at the confirmation I had never acknowledged. They were not just managing things. They were moving them, adjusting them, and now they were asking for more, as if the foundation had already been agreed upon. I closed the email and folded my hands on the desk, my next step already forming with quiet precision. If they want a conversation this weekend, then I would not walk into it with questions alone. I would walk in knowing exactly whose name was on that new account. By mid-morning, I was no longer sitting at my desk, trying to piece things together. I was moving. There's a difference between suspicion and preparation, and somewhere between Daniel's phone call and that confirmation email, I had crossed into something steadier. I changed into a navy blazer, the same one I wore to church on Sundays, and gathered a folder from the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. Inside were copies of everything I had ever considered important: bank statements, tax returns, the original estate documents Harold had prepared for Thomas and me, all neatly labeled in my handwriting. I added a fresh notepad and a pen, then paused for a moment before placing my phone on top of the stack. If I was going to ask questions, I wanted answers that could not shift or soften later. The drive to the bank took 15 minutes. The building sat on the corner of a busy intersection, the American flag out front barely moving in the still air. Inside, the lobby was quiet, a few customers seated in chairs along the wall, a television mounted overhead playing muted morning news. I approached the front desk, offering a polite smile. Good morning, I said. I would like to speak with someone about account access and authorization history. The young man behind the desk nodded and gestured toward a glass-walled office. Ms. Reynolds can help you with that. Give me just a second. A few minutes later, I was seated across from a woman in her 40s with a composed expression and a nameplate that read Angela Reynolds. She listened carefully as I explained the situation. Again, this time in person, sliding my printed statements across the desk so she could see the timeline I had outlined. She reviewed them without interruption, her eyes moving methodically from one page to the next. You have done a thorough job here, she said finally, looking up at me. Most people come in with a general concern. You have already identified the exact point where the change occurred. I prefer clarity, irreversible. She gave a small nod, then turned her monitor slightly so I could see part of the screen. What I can tell you, she said, is that the login used to make this change was recognized as an authorized device at the time. That means it was not flagged as suspicious by our system. Authorized by whom? I asked. She clicked through a few more screens. By your account credentials, Ms. Whitmore. The system does not differentiate between who physically uses them. I'll let that sit for a moment. Can you tell me where that login came from? I asked. She hesitated briefly, then said, we can see the general location tied to the device. It shows as originating from the same city where your son resides. There it was. Not a guess, not a feeling, but a line drawn between what I'd seen on paper and where it had likely been done. I did not react outwardly. I simply nodded. I would like to print that record, I said. Angela studied me for a second, then turned back to her computer. I can provide a summary report, she said. It will include the date, time, and general location of the login associated with the change. That would be helpful, I replied. While she printed the document, I glanced around the office, noticing the small details I might have overlooked on any other day, the neatly stacked brochures about retirement planning, the framed certificates on the wall, the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Ordinary things, stable things. When she handed me the report, I read it carefully before placing it into my folder. Date, time, location. It matched everything else. Is there anything else you would recommend? I asked. Angela folded her hands on the desk. You have already secured your account, which is good. Beyond that, I would suggest being very selective about who has access to your financial information moving forward. I met her eyes. I intend to be. When I left the bank, the sun was higher, the heat sharper against my skin, but I felt steadier than I had the day before. This was no longer a question of whether something had happened. It had, and it had happened close to home. I got into my car, placed the folder carefully on the passenger seat, and sat there for a moment before starting the engine. Daniel thought this weekend would be a simple conversation. Melissa believed everything was already structured in her favor. I rested my hand on the folder, feeling the weight of the papers inside. They had built their version of the story quietly, piece by piece. Now, I had the outline of the truth in my hands. And the next step was not to confront them yet, but to decide exactly how much of that truth I was willing to reveal when we finally sat down at that table. Saturday arrived with a kind of stillness that felt deliberate, as if the day itself understood what was about to unfold. I left my condo just after 9, the folder resting on the passenger seat, exactly where I had placed it the day before. The drive to Daniel's house felt shorter this time, not because the distance had changed, but because my thoughts were no longer scattered. They were aligned. When I pulled into the driveway, Melissa's car was already there, parked neatly beside Daniel's truck. The front door was unlocked. That was not unusual. What was unusual was the quiet. No music, no television, no movement. I stepped inside, closing the door gently behind me. "Hello," I called, setting my purse on the small entry table. "In the kitchen," Daniel's voice answered. I walked down the hallway, the familiar layout of the house feeling slightly different now, like a place I knew but did not fully belong to anymore. They were both seated at the kitchen table when I entered. No dishes, no food, just 3 chairs and a clean surface. Prepared. Melissa had a legal pad in front of her, a pen resting across the top. Daniel looked up as I approached, offering a small, controlled smile. "Thanks for coming, Mom," he said. "Of course," I replied, taking the chair across from them. I placed my folder on the table, but did not open it yet. Melissa leaned forward slightly, her posture composed, her tone measured. "We thought it would be good to get everything aligned," she said, "just so there are no misunderstandings moving forward." "That sounds reasonable," I said. Daniel glanced at Melissa, then back at me. "We really do appreciate everything you have done," he began. "We just want to streamline things so it is easier for everyone." "Streamline," I repeated softly. "Yes," Melissa added. "For example, instead of separate contributions and scattered expenses, we could consolidate everything into a single account. That way, we can manage it more efficiently." I watched her as she spoke, noting the confidence in her delivery, the way she had already framed the situation as something logical, beneficial. "And whose account would that be?" I asked. There was a brief pause, just long enough to matter. "It would be a joint household account," Melissa said. "Daniel and I already use it for most of our expenses." I nodded once, then reached forward and opened my folder. The papers inside were neatly arranged, each one exactly where I had placed it. I slid the printed report from the bank across the table, stopping it just within Daniel's reach. "Before we discuss any changes," I said calmly, "I think we should start with what has already been done." Daniel's expression shifted, the easy composure slipping slightly as his eyes moved over the document. Melissa did not reach for it right away. Instead, she looked at me. "What is this?" she asked. "A record," I replied, "of when my account was accessed and where the change to my transfer was made." Daniel picked up the paper, scanning the lines quickly. "Mom, this is not what it looks like," he said, his voice tightening. "Then help me understand what it looks like," I said, keeping my tone steady. Melissa finally leaned forward, pulling the paper closer to her side of the table. Her eyes moved across the page, slower than Daniel's had, more deliberate. When she spoke, her voice was still controlled, but there was a sharper edge beneath it now. "You are making this more complicated than it needs to be," she said. "We adjusted the account for convenience. It is still supporting the household." "Without telling me," I replied. "We did not think it would be an issue," she said. Daniel set the paper down, running a hand through his. "Here, Mom, it was just a change in routing. The money still goes where it is needed." I looked from one to the other, letting a brief silence settle between us before I spoke again. The account it goes to now, I said, tapping the edge of the document lightly, is not the same one I originally authorized. And according to this, the change was made from this house. That was the moment the air shifted. Daniel did not speak immediately. Melissa's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the paper, just enough to be noticeable. "We can explain that," Daniel said finally, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "I'm sure you can," I replied. "But before you do, there's one detail I would like clarified." I reached back into my folder and pulled out a second document, one I had not shown them yet, and placed it beside the first. "The name on that account," I said, meeting Melissa's eyes directly for the first time since I'd walked in, "is not Daniel's." The silence that followed was no longer polite or uncertain. It was sharp, defined, and impossible to smooth over. Because in that moment, the conversation was no longer about misunderstanding or convenience. It was about ownership, and I was about to find out exactly whose name they had chosen to hide behind. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched just long enough to make the truth feel heavier than anything that had been said so far. Then Melissa set the paper down carefully, aligning it with the edge of the table, as if precision could restore control. When she looked back up at me, her expression had changed. The softness was gone. What remained was something more direct, more certain. "The account is mine," she said plainly. Daniel shifted beside her, a quick movement that suggested he had not expected her to say it that way. "Melissa," he started, but she raised her hand slightly, stopping him without even looking in his direction. "It is under my name because I handle the household finances," she continued, her voice steady. "It made sense to centralize everything instead of splitting it across multiple accounts." I held her gaze, letting her finish without interruption. "And you decided that without telling me," I said. "We decided it was the most efficient way to manage things," she corrected, placing quiet emphasis on the word we. Daniel exhaled, leaning forward with his elbows on the table. "Mom, it is not like she's taking anything for herself," he said. "It all goes toward the house. Mortgage, utilities, groceries, Lily's expenses. It is all connected." I nodded slowly, as if considering his explanation, though the structure of it was already clear to me. "Then it should be very easy to show me," I replied. Melissa gave a small, almost amused smile. "You are asking for detailed accounting now," she said. "After all this time, I'm asking for clarity," I answered. "Those are not the same thing." She leaned back in her chair, crossing one leg over the other, her posture relaxed in a way that felt deliberate. "Eleanor, with respect, this is not really how modern households operate," she said. "We do not itemize every dollar for extended family members." The phrase landed with more intent than the words themselves. Extended family, not mother, not part of the household. A category, a boundary. Daniel rubbed his forehead, clearly uncomfortable now. "Melissa, maybe we should just go through it," he said. "It would make things easier." She glanced at him briefly, then back at me. "What would make things easier," she said, "is simplifying this arrangement moving forward, not reopening every decision we have already made." I rested my hands lightly on the folder in front of me, feeling the weight of the remaining documents still inside. I had more than enough to push harder, to force the conversation into a corner they were not prepared for. But there is a difference between proving something and timing it correctly. "Then let us talk about moving forward," I said, my tone calm, almost agreeable. That caught her attention. "Good," she replied, "because what we are suggesting is actually beneficial for everyone. If we consolidate the contributions into our main account and increase the amount slightly, we can cover everything more efficiently. No confusión, no gaps." "Increase it to what?" I asked. Daniel hesitated before answering. "We were thinking maybe $1,200 a month," he said. "That would cover the rising costs." $1,200. The number was not random. It was calculated, positioned as reasonable, framed as necessary. I nodded once, as if the figure did not surprise me. "And in return?" I asked. Melissa tilted her head slightly. "In return, everything continues as it is," she said. "You help the family, and we make sure things are handled." I let a brief silence follow that, just long enough for the imbalance in that statement to settle in the room. Then I closed the folder gently, not with finality, but with intention. I will consider it, I said. Daniel looked relieved, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Melissa studied me more closely, her eyes narrowing just a fraction, as if she were trying to determine whether I meant what I said or if there was something she had not accounted for. That sounds fair, she replied. I stood up, smoothing the front of my blazer. I would like a few days to review everything properly, I added, including the current account structure. Melissa gave a small nod, though her expression remained guarded. Of course, she said. Daniel walked me to the door, his tone softer now. Thanks for being open about this, Mom, he said. We just want to make things easier. I paused at the threshold, looking at him for a moment longer than necessary. So do I said. Then I stepped outside into the bright afternoon light. As I walked to my car, I could feel the shift clearly now. They believed they had explained enough, justified enough, and secured enough agreement to move forward. They thought the conversation had stabilized. I opened the car door, placing my folder carefully on the seat once again. What they did not realize was that I had not shown them everything. Not yet. And the next time we sat down at that table, the conversation would not be about what they wanted from me. It would be about what I was prepared to take back. That evening, I did not go straight to my desk the way I had the night before. Instead, I set my keys down, placed the folder carefully on the kitchen counter, and walked to the small cabinet above the sink where I kept my old checkbooks. It was not something I used often anymore, but I knew exactly where they were. I pulled one out, flipped through the pages, and found the carbon copies from 2 years ago. There it was, the original routing number written in my own hand, matching the document I had printed earlier. I laid it flat on the counter beside the folder, aligning past and present in a way that left no room for doubt. Then I picked up my phone and opened my banking app again, this time not to review what had already happened, but to make a small adjustment. I did not cancel the transfer. I did not reduce it. I left the $800 exactly as it was. Instead, I set up an alert, real-time notifications for any changes, any logins, any movement tied to that account. Quiet, immediate, impossible to miss. I leaned against the counter, considering the next step, then opened my contacts and selected Lily's name. It rang twice before she answered, her voice low. Grandma. Hi, sweetheart, I said gently. Are you busy? Just in my room, she replied. I could hear faint music in the background, something soft and steady. What is up? I paused just long enough to keep the question natural. I was thinking about what you said the other day, I told her. About your mom talking when I'm not around. There was a brief silence on the line. Yeah, she said quietly. I probably should not have said anything. I'm glad you did, I replied. And I'm not asking you to take sides. I just need to understand something. Another pause. Okay, she said. Do you know if your mom ever talks about the account she uses for the household? I asked. The one she manages? I kept my tone light, almost casual. Lily hesitated, then said she talks about money stuff a lot, like budgets and bills. Has she ever mentioned it being separate from your dad's account? I asked, like something just under her name. This time the pause was longer. I could hear her shifting, maybe sitting up straighter. I think so, she said slowly. She calls it her control account sometimes. Like, she says it is easier if everything goes through her first. Control account. The phrase settled into place with a clarity that felt almost precise. Thank you, Lily, I said softly. That helps more than you know. Grandma, she added, her voice a little tighter now. Are you okay? I smiled, even though she could not see it. I'm getting there, I said. Do not worry about me. After we hung up, I placed my phone down and looked back at the folder, at the printed report, at the email confirmation, at the old checkbook page. Each piece alone might have been explained away. Together, they formed something much harder to dismiss. They had not just redirected my money. They had built a system around it, named it, structured it, and now they were trying to expand it with my agreement. I walked over to my desk and opened a new document on my laptop, typing a short list. Dates, account numbers, names. Then I added one more line at the bottom. Proposed increase, $1,200. I stared at it for a moment before adding a question mark. Not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted to see how far they would go if I appeared to agree. I reached for my phone again and typed a message to Daniel. I've been thinking about what you suggested. I am open to discussing the increase this week. Let me know a good time. I read it once, then sent it. The response came faster than I expected. That is great, Mom. We can sit down Wednesday evening. Melissa will put everything together. I set the phone down slowly, letting that last sentence settle. Melissa will put everything together. Of course she would. She would organize it, present it, frame it in a way that made it all seem reasonable, necessary, even generous. I closed my laptop and gathered the papers into the folder again, this time adding the note I had just written. The plan was no longer just forming. It was in motion, because if Melissa wanted to show me exactly how her system worked, then I was going to let her build it out completely, right in front of me. And when she did, I would finally see not just where my money had gone, but how far she intended to take it next. Wednesday evening arrived exactly as expected, precise and prepared, as if Melissa had scheduled not just the time, but the tone of the entire conversation. When I stepped into Daniel's house, the kitchen table was no longer empty. It had been transformed into something closer to an office setup. A laptop sat open in front of Melissa, its screen angled slightly toward the center. Beside it was a neatly organized stack of printed sheets, each clipped into sections with labeled tabs. A calculator rested near her. Elbow, in a yellow legal pad, was already filled with notes written in tight, controlled handwriting. Daniel stood by the counter, pouring 3 glasses of water, his movements slower than usual. "Mom," he said, offering one of the glasses as I approached. "Thanks for coming back." "Of course," I replied, setting my folder down on the table, but keeping it closed for the moment. Melissa looked up, her expression composed, almost welcoming. "I think you will find this helpful," she said, gesturing toward the documents in front of her. "I took the time to put everything into a clear structure, so we can all be on the same page." "I appreciate the effort," I said, taking my seat. She turned the laptop slightly, bringing up a spreadsheet filled with columns and numbers. "This is our current monthly breakdown," she began. "Mortgage, utilities, groceries, insurance, Lily's expenses, and discretionary spending. Everything is accounted for." Her tone was confident, practiced, as if she had walked through this explanation before. Daniel nodded along, though his eyes flicked toward me more often than toward the screen. "And this," Melissa continued, tapping one section with her pen, "is where your contribution fits into the overall structure." I leaned forward slightly, studying the numbers. The categories were detailed, the totals neatly calculated. It looked thorough. It looked convincing. "You have done quite a bit of work here," I said. "It is important to be organized," she replied, "especially when multiple people are involved." I nodded once, then asked, "And the account where all of this flows through?" She did not hesitate. "That is the central account I mentioned before," she said. "Everything is routed there first, then distributed accordingly." "Including my transfer," I said. "Yes," she replied. "That is what keeps everything streamlined." I let a brief silence settle, then opened my folder, pulling out a single sheet and placing it beside her neatly arranged stack. "I would like to add one more piece to your structure," I said. Daniel shifted slightly in his chair, his attention sharpening. Melissa glanced at the paper, then back at me. "What is that?" she asked. "A confirmation from the bank," I replied, showing when the routing of my transfer was changed and from where. Her expression remained steady, but her hand paused just slightly above her notes. "We already discussed that," she said. "It was adjusted for efficiency." "Yes," I said, "but what we have not discussed is the timing in relation to something else." I reached back into my folder and pulled out another document, sliding it across the table. This one was older, printed from my email archive. "This," I continued, "is the original authorization I signed 2 years ago. It clearly lists Daniel's account as the destination." Daniel leaned forward, looking between the 2 papers, his brow tightening. Melissa's posture remained composed, but her focus had shifted entirely now. "That was before we reorganized things," she said. "Exactly," I replied. "And according to your spreadsheet, that reorganization increased your control over all incoming funds. Daniel looked up. Mom, what are you getting at? I met his eyes directly. I'm getting at the fact that this was not just a change in routing, I said. It was a shift in control, and it happened without my knowledge. Melissa placed her pen down carefully, aligning it with the edge of her legal pad. Control is not the issue here, she said. Management is. Those are not the same thing, I replied. The room felt smaller now, the air tighter, as if the structure she had built on that table was beginning to press back against her. Daniel looked between us, his uncertainty more visible than before. Okay, he said slowly. Then let us just clarify everything. Melissa, can you show exactly how the funds move once they hit the account? There it was. The moment shifting, not fully, but enough to matter. Melissa turned back to the laptop, her fingers moving across the keyboard, pulling up another tab. Of course, she said. It is all right here. I sat back slightly, folding my hands, watching as she prepared to walk us through the system she had built so carefully. Because this was what I had been waiting for. Not just explanation, not just justification, but a full display. And as the next screen loaded, filled with transactions, transfers, and distributions, I realized that whatever she showed us next would reveal far more than she intended. Melissa turned the laptop slightly more toward us, her fingers moving with practiced confidence as she opened a detailed ledger. Rows of transactions filled the screen, each one labeled, categorized, and time-stamped. As you can see, she said, tapping lightly near the top, everything that comes in is allocated based on priority. Mortgage first, then utilities, then household expenses. Daniel leaned closer, nodding as if the structure itself confirmed her point. I remained still, watching not just the numbers, but the rhythm of how she presented them. Smooth, controlled, selective. Scroll down a bit, I said calmly. She paused for a fraction of a second, then obliged, dragging the cursor downward. More entries appeared. Grocery stores, insurance payments, school-related expenses. All reasonable, all expected. Keep going, I added. Daniel glanced at me, then back at the screen. Melissa's jaw tightened slightly, but she continued. The list moved further down, into older entries, less polished, less curated. That was where the pattern shifted. I leaned forward just enough to point. That one, I said. Can you open that transaction? Melissa hesitated. It was brief, but unmistakable. It is just a transfer, she said. Standard allocation. Open it. I repeated, my tone even. Daniel looked between us, his voice quieter now. Melissa, just show it. She clicked. The details expanded on the screen. The description read, internal transfer, discretionary allocation. The amount was not small. $2,300. The destination account number matched the one I had already identified. What is discretionary allocation? I asked. Melissa folded her arms lightly. It is a buffer, she said, for unexpected expenses, repairs, emergencies, things like that. And this one? I asked, pointing to another entry just below it. Same label, different date, same destination account, another $2,000. Daniel frowned, leaning closer. I do not remember us having that kind of expense, he said. Melissa's tone sharpened slightly. Not everything needs to be itemized in the moment, Daniel. That is the point of a buffer. I reached into my folder and pulled out the printed summary from the bank, placing it beside the laptop. These transfers, I said, tapping the paper, line up exactly with the months when my contribution was redirected to your account. Daniel looked from a screen to the paper, his expression tightening. Wait, he said slowly. You're saying this money is not going toward the house. Melissa exhaled a controlled breath. It is part of the overall management, she said. You are focusing on individual lines instead of the full picture. No, irreversible. I am focusing on the part of the picture that was never shown. I reached for one more document, the one I had held back until now, and placed it directly in front of Daniel. It was a printed account summary I had requested that afternoon, showing the ownership details tied to the destination account. The name was clear. Melissa Carter, primary account holder. No secondary name listed. Daniel stared at it, his face losing color. "This is your account?" he asked, looking at Melissa. She did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice was lower, more measured. "It is the account I use to manage things," she said. "That is not what I asked," Daniel replied, his tone firmer now. "Is this where the extra money has been going?" The room shifted in a way that could not be undone. Melissa straightened slightly, her composure returning, but the foundation beneath it was no longer as steady. "It has been held there temporarily," she said. "For flexibility." I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands. "Then it should still be there," I said. "Every dollar." Daniel looked back at the screen, then at the printed summary, then at Melissa. "Show me the balance," he said. Melissa's fingers hovered over the keyboard. This time, the hesitation was longer. The silence stretched, filling the space between all three of us. Because now the question was no longer about structure or efficiency. It was about whether the money was still where she claimed it should be. And as she slowly turned the screen back toward herself, preparing to log into that account, I realized that whatever number appeared next would not just answer Daniel's question. It would decide everything that came after. Melissa's fingers finally touched the keyboard, but the confidence she had carried all evening was gone. She typed slower now, her movements deliberate, as if each keystroke might delay what was coming. Daniel leaned forward, his hand gripping the edge of the table, so tightly his knuckles turned pale. "Just log in," he said, his voice no longer calm, no longer measured. "Let's see it." She did. The screen shifted, loading the account summary. For a second, no one spoke. Then the number appeared. It was not what it should have been. Not even close. I felt something hit my chest, sharp and sudden, like the air had been pulled out of the room. Daniel stared at the screen, blinking as if his eyes needed to adjust. "Where is the rest of it?" he asked, his voice low at first, then rising. "Melissa, where is the rest of the money?" She did not answer right away. Her lips parted slightly, then pressed together again. "It has been used," she said finally. "Used for what?" He shot back louder now. "There is over $10,000 missing from what should be sitting in that account." The word missing hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I pushed my chair back slightly, my hand gripping the edge of the table as a wave of heat rushed through me. "You told me it was for the house," I said, my voice shaking despite my effort to control it. "You looked me in the eye and said it was being managed." Melissa turned toward me, her composure cracking for the first time. "It was not stolen," she said quickly. "I made decisions. Necessary decisions." "Necessary for who?" Daniel demanded, standing up now, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Because I sure do not recognize any of these amounts going toward our bills." She stood as well, her voice rising to meet his. "You think everything just runs itself? You think this house, your lifestyle, all of this just happens without someone making hard choices?" "Do not twist this," he snapped. "You move my mother's money into your personal account and then spend it without telling either of us." The word personal landed harder than anything else. I felt it settle deep, cutting through every attempt I had made to give her the benefit of the doubt. "You had access to my account," I said, my voice no longer steady, no longer restrained. "You changed the routing without my permission. That is not management. That is not organization. That is deception." Melissa shook her head, her tone sharp, defensive. "I did what needed to be done. There were expenses you would not understand." "Then explain them," Daniel interrupted, his voice echoing through the kitchen. "Right now, because from where I'm standing, this looks like you took money that was never yours to control." The room felt smaller, tighter, the air thick with something that could not be undone. I could feel my hands trembling now, not from uncertainty, but from the sheer weight of what had been confirmed. Every quiet suspicion, every careful piece of evidence had led to this moment, and the reality of it was worse than I had allowed myself to imagine. "I trusted you," I said, my voice breaking slightly despite everything. "I trusted both of you." Daniel turned toward me then, his expression shifting from anger to something closer to shock, to guilt. "Mom, I did not know," he said quickly. "I swear to you, I did not know she changed anything like this." Melissa let out a short, strained breath. You are both overreacting, she said. It is money. It can be accounted for. It can be balanced out. I stared at her, the words settling in a way that made something inside me snap into clarity. No, I said, quieter now, but far more certain. It cannot be balanced out, because this was never yours to move in the first place. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing now, his frustration spilling over into movement. We're not done with this, he said, looking directly at Melissa. You're going to explain every single transaction, every dollar, and where it went. She held his gaze, her expression hardening again, though the confidence from earlier was gone. Fine, she said, if that is what you want. I slowly gathered my papers, my hands still unsteady but purposeful. The truth was no longer hidden. It was sitting on the table between us, undeniable, documented, and impossible to explain away. And as I looked at both of them, one thing became painfully clear. This was not just a conversation about money anymore. It was about what came next. Because now that everything was out in the open, there was only one question left to answer. What exactly was I going to do about it? I did not answer that question right away. Instead, I closed the folder slowly, pressing my palm against it for a moment as if I needed to feel something solid before I spoke. The room was still tense, the air thick with everything that had just come out, but my voice, when it came, was steady again, not calm in the way it had been before, but resolved. I already know what I'm going to do, I said. Daniel stopped pacing. Melissa did not move. Mom, Daniel began, but I raised my hand slightly, stopping him. No, I said, you have both said enough. I reached in my folder and pulled out one final document, placing it flat on the table between us. It was not a bank statement. It was not a report. It was a legal notice, printed on heavy paper with Harold Green's firm letterhead at the top. Melissa's eyes flicked to it first, narrowing slightly. Daniel leaned closer. What is this? He asked. It is a formal record of unauthorized access and financial redirection, I said. Filed this afternoon. The words landed harder than anything else had so far. Melissa's posture stiffened. You filed something? She said, her voice sharper now. Yes, I replied. With the bank and with an attorney. Daniel's face went pale. Mom, you did not have to. I absolutely did. I interrupted. Because what happened here is not a misunderstanding. It is not poor communication. It is unauthorized control over my finances, and that has consequences. Melissa let out a short, incredulous laugh, but it sounded strained now. You are really going to escalate this? She said. Over money that stayed within the family. I looked directly at her, holding her gaze without hesitation. You lost the right to call this family the moment you decided I was just an obligation, I said. The words sat between us, final and unsoftened. Daniel sank back into his chair, running both hands through his hair. What happens now? He asked, his voice quieter, uncertain. Now, I said, the bank investigates the account activity. Any funds that were redirected without authorization will be traced. And if they cannot be accounted for properly, they will be treated as misappropriated. Melissa's composure cracked completely then. You cannot be serious, she said, standing up abruptly. You're going to drag this into something legal? You already did that, I replied. I'm just responding to it. Daniel looked at her, then back at me, his expression shifting into something harder, something more decisive than I had seen all evening. Melissa, he said, his tone firm now, is there anything else you have not told me? She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her silence louder than any answer. That was enough. Daniel stood up slowly, the tension in his shoulders settling into something colder, more certain. I want you to pack a bag, he said. Melissa blinked, caught off guard. What? You heard me, he replied. Until this is sorted out, you are not staying here. Daniel, this is my house too. She snapped. Not like this it is not, he said. Not after what you just did. The shift was complete now. Whatever balance had existed before was gone. Melissa looked at me then, her expression a mix of disbelief and anger, as if she had expected me to back down at some point, to soften, to reconsider. I did not. I simply gathered my folder, standing up with a steadiness that came from knowing there was nothing left to question. This will move forward, I said, with or without your cooperation. She did not respond. For the first time since I had known her, she had no version of the situation she could control. I walked toward the door, Daniel following a step behind me. When I reached the threshold, I paused, turning back just once. Melissa was still standing by the table, the laptop open in front of her, the numbers still on the screen, but they no longer worked in her favor. They never had. I spent my life building something real, I said quietly. I'm not going to let you reduce it to something you can manage. Then I stepped outside into the evening air, closing the door behind me. As I walked to my car, I felt something settle inside me. Not relief, not satisfaction, but something firmer. Something earned. Because in the end, I was not the one who had been reduced. And I was certainly not the one who was leaving with nothing.